Don't you hate it? You know those presentations where the slides are so jam-packed with text and bullet points and you just start to feel like, did I accidentally wander into a literature class?
Haha, yeah. It's so funny because people think that just like more information on the slide makes the presentation better, but it really can backfire to just cram a ton of stuff onto one slide.
Yeah, it really can. I've definitely completely zoned out during presentations that felt like I was trying to read a textbook at the same time that someone's talking to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Is there a reason why our brains just shut down when they're just faced with that much information all at once?
There is. It's something called cognitive load. And basically, your brain can only process so much information at one time, right? So if you are looking at a slide that is just completely covered in text and you're trying to listen to the speaker, your working memory just gets completely overloaded and it can't do both. So it makes it really hard to take in what the speaker is saying.
Interesting. So instead of helping the presenter make their point, a really cluttered slide is actually hurting them.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of listening to the speaker, the audience is just completely stuck trying to figure out what's going on the screen.
Okay, so it seems like the presentations that I remember the most, or the ones that really stick with me, always seem to have those really clean and simple slides. So I guess it's not really about aesthetics then.
No, not at all. It's really about respecting your audience and their capacity to take in information and making sure that your message actually gets to them. So it's not about dumbing things down. It's really about giving your ideas space to breathe.
I like that. Okay, so how do we actually create those simple, effective slides? What are some concrete things we can actually do?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to kind of rethink our relationship with text. So instead of treating slides like a mini essay or something like that, we need to kind of embrace being brief. So think of your slides as headlines, not like novels.
Okay, so ditch the paragraphs and bullet points and let the visuals do the talking.
Exactly. But even with visuals, less is more a lot of the time. If you have too many images or graphics, it can create the same kind of cognitive overload that we're trying to avoid.
It's like when you add a dash of spice to a dish. A little bit can really enhance the flavor, but if you add way too much, it just overwhelms everything.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And speaking of balance, visual consistency is another thing that is really important.
Okay, so sticking to the same fonts, colors, and an overall style throughout the presentation.
Exactly, yeah. And that will prevent the audience from being distracted by just jarring visual shifts.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, there was this other concept that I found really intriguing in our research, and that was this idea of white space. And so it seems kind of counterintuitive that just blank space could actually make the slides more effective.
Yeah, I know it does seem a little counterintuitive, but all of those empty areas are actually doing a lot of work because it gives your audience's eyes a place to rest, right? So it creates this visual breathing room, which makes the content much easier to process.
It's almost like a pause in a piece of music,
Yeah.
to allow the listener to absorb the previous notes and then kind of anticipate what's going to come next.
Exactly. It prevents that cognitive fatigue and it keeps your audience engaged.
Okay, so we've talked about the why and the what of, simple slide design. What about the how? What are some really practical tips that people can use right now to simplify their slides?
Well, the first thing, even before you open up your presentation software or anything like that, is you need to know what your objective is. What is that one key takeaway that you want your audience to remember?
It's like having a compass to guide the entire presentation. Right?
Mhm.
So every single element of the presentation should point back to that one main idea.
Precisely, yeah. And once you have that North Star, you can start building out your slides. Now let's talk about fonts, because choosing the right font can really make a big difference.
Yeah, I've definitely been in those presentations where the font was so tiny or so stylized that you can barely even read what's on the screen.
Exactly. Legibility is key. Choose a font that's easy to read, even from the back of the room.
Okay, so big, clear fonts. What else?
This is where it gets a little counterintuitive, but you want to stick to one idea per slide. I know it's tempting to try and cram everything in, but remember what we talked about with cognitive load.
Right. One slide, one idea, keep it nice and focused. So what about color? What should we keep in mind when we're choosing colors?
Yeah. Color is a really powerful tool, but it's important to use it strategically. So the key is contrast. You want enough contrast between your text color and your background color so that the text is easy to read.
So classic combinations like black text on a white background or white text on a dark background.
Exactly. And avoid using too many colors on a single slide. Stick to 2 or 3 complementary colors, it'll just create a sense of visual harmony.
Okay, so we've talked about text, visuals, consistency, white space, fonts, and color. Is there anything else we should keep in mind?
Yeah, data visualization, because if you need to present data, remember the goal is clarity. So a simple bar graph or a pie chart can be way more impactful than a really complex visualization.
Oh man, data visualization is something I always overthink.
Yeah, it's a common struggle, but by focusing on those clear and concise visuals, you can make your data really understandable and engaging.
Okay, I'm already starting to see how much more impact a well-designed, simple slide can have.
It's a real game changer. And, all these principles can be applied to almost any presentation that you're giving.
It's all about finding the right balance between, like, information and that visual appeal to create something that's informative and engaging, right?
Absolutely. But, it's one thing to talk about all these principles. It's another to actually see how they work in practice.
That's a great point. I wonder if we could, like, imagine a specific presentation scenario and kind of walk through how to design simple and effective slides for it.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so how about this? Imagine that you are launching a brand new product, something that's totally innovative and exciting, and you're pitching it to potential investors.
I like it. Let's say we've invented this device that can instantly translate animal languages.
Wow. Okay. So how do we use simple design to really sell this idea to investors? So first, we need to figure out what's the one thing we want investors to remember about our product.
Okay, so maybe something like, this device will revolutionize the way we communicate with animals.
Perfect. That's our North Star. Now let's translate that into a simple, impactful slide.
Okay, so I'm picturing a clean slide with like a really simple, eye-catching image of the device, maybe with like a cat and a dog looking intrigued.
Exactly. A really strong visual. And underneath, our tagline, revolutionizing animal communication. Short, punchy, and memorable.
And no bullet points listing all the technical specs or anything?
No bullet points. We'll save all those details for a handout or the Q&A. Right now, it's all about capturing their imagination.
This is so cool. I'm loving this.
And by keeping that slide simple, we allow the audience to focus on the visual and on that message.
So we've hooked them with the main idea. How do we build on that momentum and really flesh out the pitch?
Well, instead of hitting them with all these features, let's just focus on the key benefits. So we could have one slide highlighting how the device could improve animal welfare. Maybe another slide talking about the really groundbreaking technology behind it. And then maybe a final slide that just illustrates the market potential.
Okay, so each slide kind of tells a story, and then it all goes back to that central message.
Yeah.
Revolutionizing how we talk to animals.
Exactly. And because those slides are simple, the audience can really focus on the emotional impact of those stories and the power of our vision.
This is so eye-opening. I'm starting to see how powerful simplicity can be, not just for design, but for storytelling as a whole, I guess.
It really is a transformative approach, and anyone can do it. It's all about making a conscious choice to prioritize clarity and impact over all of that clutter.
I'm feeling really inspired, and I can't wait to apply these principles to my next presentation. But it also seems like there's even more to learn about this whole, like, simple slide design thing.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more. We've only just scratched the surface here. There's this whole psychology behind how we even perceive visuals.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, me too. There's a lot more to explore. All this talk about decluttering our slides and making things simple, it makes me think about bullet points. I have like a real love-hate relationship with bullet points.
Oh, tell me about it. Bullet points can either be like super helpful to organize your thoughts, or they can just turn your presentation into a total snooze fest.
Right. And it all comes down to how you use them. We need to stop thinking of bullet points as like full sentences and start treating them more like visual cues.
Interesting. So instead of trying to cram all the details into a bullet point, we should just use them to highlight like the main essence of an idea, kind of like a springboard for you to go into a deeper explanation.
Precisely. Each bullet point should be like a little trigger prompting you to elaborate on it and really bring that idea to life.
That makes sense. It's about using them strategically to kind of guide the flow of the presentation, not trying to like replace your role as the speaker.
Exactly. And sometimes you might not even need bullet points at all. Sometimes a powerful image or a really well-chosen quote can be so much more effective than like a whole list of bullet points.
That's true, especially when you consider what's called the picture superiority effect. We tend to remember information that's presented visually way better than stuff that's just presented as text.
That's a great point. That principle is like a total game changer when it comes to slide design. Choosing strong visuals isn't just about aesthetics, it's about working with how our brains actually prefer to take in information.
It's almost like we're speaking the language of the brain, right?
Yeah,
When we use visuals effectively.
exactly. We're working with our audience, not against them.
Hmm.
Going back to our animal translator pitch, I'm wondering how we might use simple slide design to kind of address some of the concerns that investors might have, like stuff about competition or the technology being too complicated.
That's a really good point. How do we tackle those questions but still keep things like simple and visually engaging?
Well, instead of avoiding those challenges, we can just address them head on. And we can use like visual metaphors to really illustrate our points and build trust with the investors.
Ooh, visual metaphors. I love that.
Yeah.
What would that look like? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say an investor is like, well, there's already a lot of competition in the pet tech market. We could use an image of like a crowded pond with all these different fish, and each fish represents a competitor.
Okay, so lots of fish in a small pond, signifying a crowded marketplace.
Exactly. And then we transition to a slide showing like a vast open ocean with a single unique fish swimming freely. And that represents our animal translator.
That's brilliant because you're visually saying, hey, our product is different, it stands out, and there's all this room to grow.
Exactly. And we're doing it in a way that's visually engaging, and we don't have to get into like all the technical details or jargon.
Is that telling a visual story that makes sense on an emotional level and a logical level?
Exactly. That's the power of simple slide design. It's not just about making things pretty, it's about strategic communication. It's about getting complex information into a form that people can understand, connect with, and remember.
This is making me realize that simplicity isn't really about like oversimplifying or dumbing things down. It's more about finding the most elegant way to convey a message.
I couldn't agree more. It's about clarity, not complexity. It's about what really matters.
This has been such a great conversation. I'm feeling a lot less intimidated by the thought of creating engaging presentations.
That's wonderful to hear. Remember, the goal isn't to make these super flashy or complex slides.
Right. It's to create slides that actually help you connect with your audience.
Exactly. When you think of simplicity first, you're allowing your audience to focus on what really matters. You and your ideas.
I love that. We've covered a lot of ground, but it feels like there's so much more to explore, especially when it comes to like the psychology of design.
You're absolutely right. There's this whole world of cognitive principles we can use to make our presentations not only nice to look at, but really engaging.
Ooh, I can't wait to delve deeper into those principles.
Me neither. There's so much more to uncover.
This whole idea that there's like a psychology behind how we see things, it's so cool. I never really thought about it in terms of slide design.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. When you understand how our brains actually process visual information, you can really up your game when it comes to designing slides.
So we're not just making slides look good, we're making them work with the way our brains think.
Exactly. Our brains are always trying to figure things out, looking for patterns and making connections. And there are all of these principles called Gestalt principles that describe how we organize what we see.
Oh, wow. So how do those principles apply to like designing slides? Can you give me an example?
Of course. One of them is called the principle of proximity, and it basically says that our brains tend to group things together that are close to each other. So if you've got a bunch of stuff on a slide, think about putting related items together visually.
So instead of just like randomly scattering elements all over the slide, you want to make these little visual clusters that actually make sense.
Exactly. It's like you're creating a visual map that guides your audience and helps them get it. And you can use this not just on individual slides, but throughout your whole presentation.
It's really cool how these simple things can make such a big difference in how our audience understands things.
Yeah, it really does. Another principle I wanted to mention is the principle of closure.
Closure. I've never heard of that one.
Basically, our brains love to fill in the blanks, to create complete pictures in our minds, even if we're not seeing every single detail.
Oh, wow. Can we actually use that like to our advantage when designing slides?
Absolutely. Instead of overloading people with every little detail, you can just give them enough to make them curious, and their brains will kind of fill in the rest.
So it's kind of like leaving a little bit of mystery, so they're more engaged.
Yeah. You're basically inviting your audience to participate, not just sit there and passively listen.
This is really making me think differently about things. It's like we're learning the secret code of the brain. So we talked about this whole picture superiority effect earlier. Can you tell me more about how to actually use visuals to make our presentations more memorable?
Yeah, of course. It's not just about slapping any old picture on a slide. It's about finding images that are relevant and have meaning. And most importantly, ones that people will remember.
Okay, so what actually makes an image memorable? What should we be looking for?
Well, one thing is emotional resonance. Images that evoke strong emotions tend to really stick with us.
Makes sense. You're more likely to remember something that made you feel something.
Exactly. So think about what you want your audience to feel and choose images that support that feeling.
Okay, emotional connection. What else should we be thinking about?
Novelty is another big one. Our brains love new things, unusual things. So try to find visuals that are unexpected, maybe even a little quirky.
So, like, stay away from those cheesy stock photos that everyone's seen a million times.
Aha, yeah, exactly. Find images that are unique and that make people think.
Emotional resonance and novelty. Got it. Is there anything else we should keep in mind?
Oh, yeah. This one might seem obvious, but it's important.
Uh-huh.
Relevance. Make sure your visuals actually relate to what you're talking about. They should support your points and make sense in the context of your presentation.
So, no random images just because they look cool.
That's right. Every single visual needs to have a purpose.
Okay, that makes sense. This has been such a great conversation. It feels like we went way beyond just like basic tips and tricks
Yeah.
and really got into the psychology of it all.
I agree. And this isn't just about making better presentations. It's about becoming better communicators in general.
Oh, that's a really good point. Because if you understand how people's brains work, you can communicate more effectively in all sorts of situations.
Absolutely. It's a skill that can help you in so many areas of life.
I feel so much more confident about my next presentation now. And honestly, I'm just really excited about using these principles to make it amazing.
That's awesome. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about trying new things and always learning. And most importantly, finding the best way to share your ideas with the world.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing all this amazing information with me and with our listeners. It's been such a fun journey.
The pleasure was all mine. And to everyone listening, remember to embrace simplicity and let your creativity shine through.